not the advertised video. Hi, welcome back to St Blazey Model World. Now firstly I must apologise to my subscribers and at the end of the last video I did promise that we would be going out and about looking at some level crossings and some signals and other pieces of railway infrastructure. Unfortunately, since the last video here in the UK we've experienced a desperate fuel shortage at petrol stations, and that has meant conserving what fuel we have for essential travel. So my apologies, this is not the one advertised, but we will be getting to that in the next video. And also, just real quick before we get into this video, I'd like to ask you please to check if you are still subscribed to my channel. That's if you wish to be. It was drawn to my attention this week that a number of people who believe they were subscribed have suddenly been unsubscribed by YouTube. I don't think there's anything suspicious about that. It's just a glitch in the program. So if you do wish to be subscribed, please hit the subscribe button, hit the bell, make sure you select all, and that way you won't be missing out on any of our videos. Now, in my last video I did talk about displaying models, and I featured what you're looking at now, which is my 1 meter test track. Just to recap, if it looks a little bit strange, it is. It's got an end gauge track right at the front here, and that's this one here where this DMU multiple unit is sitting, and at the back here we've got a double O gauge piece of track. They're both 1 meter long and they're just flexible track, but they're glued on straight to this. On the back of that video I received a number of questions about this, and I had made a video about this piece of equipment that I use before, but it was one of my first videos, and to be honest it wasn't very good and didn't really get the number of views that I'd hoped it would get. But having had some questions about it, I thought we'd do a video now just about this particular piece of equipment, and I'll talk you through it and why it's set up in the way that it is. And before we get into the top part, the part that you see, I suppose it's worth having a very quick look at the underside. This is a standard sort of baseboard construction, really. The timbers that you can see are 2x1 timbers, a cross brace just here, and of course we've got 2x1s at the end. They're supporting this piece of plywood here. I think that's something like 7 or 8 mil ply, certainly not 12 mil ply. And at the very end of the of this piece of track and this baseboard are 2 sets of wires, one for the end gauge and one for the double O gauge. And really this is my test track. I have I'm lucky enough to have a couple of duet controllers, name of which escapes me right at the minute. H&M, somebody help me out. I'm sure you're screaming it at the screen right now. But I can hook up, of course, both the end gauge and the double O gauge track simultaneously, and that allows me to test my locos and any locos that people bring to me for work. And just before we flip this thing over, you'll just notice, I mean, it's screwed together. It's pretty small. I mean, you're only talking sort of 7 or 8 inches across, and as I say, it's about 1 meter long. Confusing metric there, but there we go. That's the way it is. 30 millimeters, I suppose, not even that. 25 millimeters, something like that across, and 1,000 millimeters in length. So let's flip it over and have a look. So as I said, it's just a 1 meter test track. At the far right hand side as we view it, you'll notice it's missing a buffer stop there. I do have that simply fell off. I just haven't bothered to reattach it. But when I put this on the last video, people were asking me why there was no scenery at all on one side, and yet when we go to the far end, we'll just move up there quickly, we have full scale scenery really. So we'll look at that, and I'll explain why it's like that, and we'll have a look at some more of the detail on this piece of board. So as I said, quite early on when I started this channel, I wanted to make a demonstration of railway scenery, but I wanted to provide a stark contrast between having no scenery and scenery, and it seemed to me that this baseboard provided a good vehicle on which to do that. So at the far end here on the right hand side, as we look, we actually have zero scenery applied, nothing, absolutely nothing. And you'll notice even here I haven't even bothered to paint in this area. Further along, the baseboard is painted, and in common with many other model railway enthusiasts, this was just painted in a brown poster paint, cheap, very cheap poster paint from a craft store. I think I got something like 500 millilitres for a couple of quid UK sterling, £2 UK sterling, and that provided a base covering. As regards to the track, and for the purposes now for the rest of this video, ignore the fact that one side is N gauge and the far side, as you're looking at it, is 00. Just ignore that. But as regards to the track, you see here at the very end of the track, there's no scenic colouring, no scenic treatment at all applied to both the 00 gauge and the N gauge. As we move further along, you'll notice, I hope, that the track has actually been painted, and that's been sprayed in Rail Match Sleeper Grime. That's an enamel paint. It's one of the harder paints, so if you are using that, please get yourself outside if that's possible, and if it's not, make sure you're working in a well ventilated area. Change not just the colour of the sleepers, but also the colour of the track. And in the sides of the track here, you can see that some colouring has been applied, and that actually makes the start, the very basics of a nice piece of scenery to look at, and improves the look of our rolling stock as it moves along. Just after that, we've introduced some ballast, and I've done this in the way I do it, and it's there must be 1,001 videos on YouTube about ballast and how to apply it. I've done it the way that I've done it, which is I lay it dry, make sure that my track shoulders are as how I want them to be, and then the whole lot gets sprayed with something to break down the tension first. You can use alcohol, isopropyl alcohol for that, but I tend to use water and washing up liquid mix, and then sprayed with a dilution of PVA, and that sets the ballast. And that's how I do it. As I say, you can find many other videos on YouTube, and I'm sure people are saying, well, that's not how I do mine. Well, everything I show you on my channel is stuff that I have done for years and works for me, and the ballast is no exception. And of course, where you have more than one track side by side, you have a ballasted area in the middle of those tracks, and so I've gone along with that as well, and that ballast has been applied in exactly the same way as my track ballast. And I think, you know, I like it. I don't worry about getting every piece of ballast off of the sleepers. If you saw my recent video where we visited Roach Station, There were areas there where there were lots of ballast on the sleepers. I've got more important things to worry about in life, but if you do like to make sure there is no ballast on your sleepers, crack on. It's absolutely fine with me. There are no right and wrongs, we're just sharing experiences and how we go about things. Along here in the ballast that lies in between the tracks, I've created some grooves, and that's to give a variation of the ballast. As we saw when we went to Roach Railway Station, there is considerable variation in colour, texture and indeed distribution of the ballast, and I've tried to replicate that here on my test track as well. I've also introduced some foliage on the railway line itself in the middle of the track, both on the N gauge and over here on the double O gauge, and that's quite common, you know, in lines that are not used as much as they perhaps once were. We get foliage building up, don't we? You know, natural distribution of seedlings, and we get that. So that's another touch of realism. Just a bit further along, I've produced some foliage in between the tracks as well. And again, you know, natural process. The birds drop these seedlings and we get this foliage growing in between tracks, especially where the tracks are not as busy as they used to be. And I like it. I mean, it's, you know, all personal taste this, but I like that. And you'll notice some very subtle pieces like this piece here. There's hardly any foliage there, just in between these two sleepers, but for me, you know, that's what it's all about, these very, very small details. And you'll notice also some colouring on the ballast. Let me just find a piece. We've got a piece right here, just a black wash being applied to the ballast there to give a stain, bit of variation of colour. It's all the things that matter. And when you look at a model railway, when you visit model railway exhibitions, or even examine your own layout and see where it's at, where can I add some little bit of detail just to give me a bit more realism. And all these things matter. Now at the far end of my layout, my test track here, on the left hand side as we view it, you'll notice that I've created a small rock formation, and that follows the same principle really as the track itself. So on the right hand side here we've got our basic rock formation, and this is made from polyfiller, no colouring really, just a little bit there. And as we move along we can see some introduction of grey and a flesh colour just to give some variation and tone. And then a little bit further along still we've introduced some static grass and some foliage at the base of the rocks and some foliage on the rock face itself. All these little things that add up to making our model railway look more realistic than just basically laying track. We've got a little bit of a grass verge nearest our viewing point here, and again some foliage introduced. And at the end of the test track, of course, we have two sets of buffers, one for the N gauge here, one for the double O gauge here. And behind the buffers and around them I've introduced even more foliage. Because, well, that's how it would be, isn't it? You know, these things develop over time and we want to recreate that. In between the double O gauge track, just here, and our cliff formation, I've put in a very small road. And this again, I've done in the same way that I do everything else. That roadway is made up of N gauge ballast, and I've used a wash to stain it in various areas. And I know that you can buy a pre-printed road for your model railway layout in various scales. But I really don't like the way that's all uniform in its appearance. And so for me, ballasting a road, as strange as it may seem, does give you a much more realistic appearance. So there we are, a 1 metre test track and a range of scenery applied to illustrate how much better our railway looks with scenery compared to no scenery at all. I must end this video by stating this. If you have a very, very large layout, I do fully understand and appreciate that applying scenery is probably your very last priority. And that is absolutely fine with me. I'm not here to preach, I'm simply trying to explain why I do things the way that I do, and I hope that you'll agree that with the introduction of some scenery, our model railway really does come to life. That's it for this one. As I said at the very beginning, I'm sorry it's not the video advertised, but I hope you've enjoyed it nonetheless. The fuel shortage in the UK is certainly easing, and I do hope that the next video will indeed be looking at real railway infrastructure. That's it for now. Take care, stay safe. Bye now from St Blazey Model World.